My name's Ryan. I'm 29 now, but the story I'm about to share started nearly 7 years ago, back when I was a 22-year-old college graduate, fresh into my first real job, completely oblivious to just how twisted my own family could be. I grew up in a small suburban town, the kind where everyone knew everyone and reputation stuck like gum on the bottom of your shoe. My brother, Drew, 2 years older, was the golden child, varsity athlete, class president, the one my mom proudly introduced as my perfect son. I was the quiet one, the smart one, if we're being generous. But in our household, brains never won over charm. My parents, or more specifically, my mom, always favored Drew. If I got an A, Drew C+ was still celebrated because he's under so much pressure with sports. If I got a job offer, she'd ask if it paid more than Drew's. Spoiler, it didn't, and even if it did, she'd just change the subject. My dad, he was a neutral ghost in the background, rarely standing up to mom and never getting involved in her family decisions. And those decisions usually meant Drew got what he wanted when he wanted it. I met Emily at a coffee shop downtown. She was smart, kind, and had this way of listening that made you feel like the only person in the room. We started dating during my senior year of college, and even as I graduated and moved into the whirlwind of corporate life, we stuck together. We weren't flashy, no Instagram couple nonsense, but we were solid. At least, I thought we were. My family never fully warmed up to her. My mom would constantly make little remarks like, "She's cute, but not really your level, honey." And my brother? He was civil but cold. At the time, I thought it was just the usual territorial sibling thing. Now I know better. The first real crack happened at my graduation dinner. It was supposed to be my celebration, but somehow Drew ended up giving a toast that sounded more like a resume reading of his own accomplishments. It's amazing seeing my little brother graduate. I remember when he couldn't even throw a football. He joked, making the whole table laugh. Except Emily, who gave me a sympathetic glance. I brushed it off. Drew had always needed the spotlight. I was used to dimming my own so he could shine. Looking back, that dinner was a warning shot. A few months later, Emily and I moved in together. It was a modest apartment in the city, nothing special, but we made it ours. I'd started ring shopping, quietly, slowly. I wanted it to be perfect. I hadn't told anyone yet, not even my best friend, because I knew how fast news traveled in our circles. But one night, as we were packing up to visit my parents for the weekend, Emily said something strange. "Do you think your mom actually likes me?" she asked, folding a sweater. I laughed half-heartedly. "She's just blunt. She takes time to warm up." Emily didn't laugh. She just looked down at the sweater. "It's not just her. Drew gives me this weird vibe. Like, he stares sometimes when you're not looking. Or he'll ask me strange questions. Last week he texted me asking what kind of wine I liked. Randomly. My stomach twisted. He what? She shrugged. It was probably nothing. But it wasn't nothing. That was the moment something inside me started watching. I became a little more alert when we were around family. I started noticing Drew's long glances. How his tone changed when he spoke to her. Too smooth, too familiar. And my mom. She'd keep inviting Drew to events we were both supposed to attend, movie nights, dinners, and then accidentally forget to tell me until the last minute, claiming she assumed I was busy with work. Then came the birthday party. Emily turned 24 in July, and I threw her a small celebration at our place. Just a few friends, cake, wine, some music. I wasn't planning to invite my family, but Emily thought it'd be a nice gesture. So I caved. My mom and Drew showed up late, unannounced, and brought a bottle of champagne that probably cost more than my rent. My mom hugged Emily tightly, too tightly, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Drew walked in like he owned the place, complimented her outfit, then joked, "You sure you're not out of his league?" Everyone laughed. I didn't. After that night, Emily seemed off, distant. She smiled less, touched me less. I chalked it up to stress. She was applying to grad school, after all, but a quiet voice in the back of my mind whispered, "Something's wrong." Then came the proposal, or what was supposed to be. I'd planned a weekend trip, mountains, cabin, quiet. I had the ring. I had the words. But the night before we were supposed to leave, Emily sat me down and said, "I don't think I can do this." At first, I thought she meant the trip. Then she said, "Us." I blinked. "What are you talking about?" Her voice trembled. "I know about the other girl, Ryan." My heart dropped. "What other girl?" She looked like she was trying to be brave, but her hands were shaking. Don't lie. Drew told me. He showed me the texts. He said you've been cheating for months. I couldn't breathe. Emily, I haven't. I swear on everything. I haven't. But she wouldn't look at me. He said he caught you. He said you begged him not to tell me. The world tilted. I wanted to scream, but all that came out was a whisper. You believe him over me? There was silence. And in that silence, everything between us shattered. Emily moved out a week later. My mom called once, not to ask how I was, but to say, "You'll be okay, sweetie. She was never meant for you anyway." I didn't respond. Then came the final blow. 3 months after the breakup, I got a text from an old college friend. "Hey man, you seeing this?" Attached was a photo from a Facebook engagement announcement. Drew and Emily, smiling, her hand on his chest, flashing my ring. I stared at it for a long time. I thought I'd cry. Instead, I laughed. A small, hollow sound that echoed in my empty apartment. I packed a bag that night. I didn't tell anyone. I turned off my phone, and I disappeared. No texts, no emails, no explanations. Let them fill in the blanks. I just walked away from all of it. That was the end of who I used to be, and the start of something else entirely. I vanished. Not in the dramatic, burn everything down kind of way, just quietly, deliberately. I quit my job, broke the lease, deleted every social media account I had, and bought a used sedan with what little savings I had left. I drove west, toward states I'd never seen, mountains I'd only read about, and towns where no one had ever heard the name Ryan Bennett. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to live in Drew's shadow or shrink under my mother's disapproval. It was terrifying, and it was freedom. For 2 years, I worked odd jobs and moved often. Sometimes I was a bartender, other times a barista, once even a bellhop at a ski lodge in Colorado. I learned to love silence. I read a lot. I kept a notebook, filled it with ideas. One of them, a startup concept I dreamed about in college but never had the guts to pursue, slowly began to take shape. I won't bore you with the grind, but let's just say that isolation sharpens you. And bitterness? Bitterness, when channeled right, is fuel. I taught myself code, saved obsessively, partnered with someone I met online who shared the vision, and after about 3 years, the business finally took off. It started small, then grew fast, like wildfire in a dry forest. Investors came. Partnerships followed. By 28, I wasn't just doing well. I was quietly wealthy. Quiet enough that no one back home knew a thing. But they were about to. The first time I heard from my family again was during a late summer afternoon. I was sitting in my home office, staring out over a quiet lake I now lived beside, when my phone, a new number unconnected to my past, buzzed with a random email notification. Subject line, "Family reunion. We miss you, Ryan." I stared at the name. Mom. The email was oddly cheerful, as if the past 5 years hadn't happened, as if they hadn't betrayed me, ridiculed me, thrown me aside like I was nothing. She wrote about how everyone was so excited to finally be together again, how Drew and Emily would be there with their little one. Apparently, I had a nephew, and how it wouldn't be the same without you. That was the first I'd heard of the child. I didn't respond, but that email opened a door, and soon enough, I found myself being passively watched. My old LinkedIn profile, which I'd locked and buried, had a sudden spike in views. My business, now a major player in its niche, was being followed by accounts with my family's last name. One evening, I even saw Drew's name appear briefly as a viewer on a podcast I'd done under a pseudonym. It clicked. Someone had figured it out. A few weeks later, another email arrived, this time from my father. The tone was different, stiffer, more cautious. "Hey son, I know it's been a while. Your mom told me about the reunion. She misses you. Drew. Well, he regrets how things went down. I know you probably don't want to hear from us, but maybe it's time to let go of the past. It'd mean a lot to your mother." I didn't reply. I wasn't ready. But the emails didn't stop. They came from my cousin, my aunt, even Emily, whose message simply said, "I hope you're okay. I think about you sometimes." I deleted it without opening the rest. Then, something happened that shifted everything. One of my business partners forwarded me an email from an interested investor looking to arrange a meeting. They'd used my real name, the one I never advertised publicly. The message was vague, filled with flattery, but something about it felt off. I dug a little deeper, had someone on my team trace the source. It was Drew. He'd used a fake name, a burner address. Tried to pose as an investor to get in touch with me. I saw red. He wanted something, and I knew exactly what it was. A few days later, I called my old college roommate, James, one of the few people I'd kept in loose contact with. He still lived near my hometown and, more importantly, had ties to people my brother still interacted with. Hey, I said. Weird question. Have you seen Drew lately? James laughed. Man, yeah, actually. You're not gonna believe this. Guy's in debt up to his ears. Mortgage is underwater, car got repossessed, and rumor is Emily's threatening to leave. Again, that last word, again, hit harder than I expected. Apparently, their marriage was not the fairy tale Facebook had promised. Turns out when the foundation of your relationship is betrayal and manipulation, the walls tend to crack fast. Emily had tried to launch some kind of influencer brand, but it flopped. Drew had burned through savings, made some bad investments, including a failed crypto gamble, and was now clinging to what little they had left. And worse, they'd moved back in with my parents. Of course they had. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. But then James added, your mom still brags about Drew like he's God's gift to the planet. Pretends none of it's his fault. Tells everyone Emily's just going through a phase. It's pathetic. Nothing had changed. The golden child could do no wrong. And me? I was still the ghost. Until I decided not to be. The next family reunion was scheduled for early spring. An outdoor venue, rented out picnic area, all the distant cousins and second aunts, the full cast. It was the kind of event my mom lived for, social peacocking in its purest form. According to the email chain James forwarded me, Drew was supposed to be the unofficial guest of honor, with a toast planned in his name and everything. I RSVP'd, anonymously, under a fake name, just to see if they'd notice. They didn't. The weeks leading up to the reunion were strangely meditative. I didn't feel rage or even sadness anymore, just a steady, calculated calm. I pulled my old suit from the back of the closet, had it tailored, then rented a luxury car for the day, sleek, black, the kind that turns heads but doesn't scream, trying too hard. I told my assistant to clear my calendar. I booked a hotel 2 towns over, and I waited. The morning of the reunion, I arrived 10 minutes early. The venue was already filling with people, kids running around, distant relatives laughing. I parked the car in full view of the entrance, stepped out slowly, adjusted my jacket, and made my way toward the tables. No one recognized me at first. Not until I walked straight past the welcome booth and casually picked up a drink from the refreshment table. Then I heard it, a sharp intake of breath. Ryan. I turned. It was Aunt Michelle, the one who used to sneak me cookies as a kid and tell me I was too sensitive when my mom snapped at me. Oh my God, it is you. Others started turning. Whispers spread. I smiled politely, nodded once, and kept walking. Then I saw them. My mom, standing near the stage, frozen. Drew beside her, hand in his pocket, face pale. And Emily, older, wearier, still beautiful in that distant kind of way, holding a toddler on her hip, staring at me like she'd seen a ghost. I didn't break stride. I walked right up to them, opened my mouth. And then, they didn't show up. Not at first. A rustle of conversation passed through the crowd. My mom's phone buzzed. She read a message, then her expression soured. Their car broke down, she muttered. 2 blocks away. Of course it did. I glanced at the black luxury car parked near the gate, sunlight gleaming off the polished hood. Every eye was on me now. And for the first time in years, I didn't shrink. I smiled and waited. The silence that followed was almost theatrical. I stood there, drink in hand, the weight of every whisper and stare pressing against my back like a slow-building wave. But I didn't move. I didn't flinch. If anything, I let them look, let them wonder. My mother, of course, was the first to try and recover. She moved toward me with that signature tight-lipped smile she always wore when trying to appear gracious, the one that never reached her eyes. Ryan, she said, her tone overly bright, like I was some distant cousin who'd RSVP'd last minute. We're so glad you could come. I sipped my drink, paused, then answered, are you? Her expression faltered for half a second, and then she leaned in for a hug that I didn't return. She smelled like expensive hairspray and old perfume. The same scent she wore at every school function she'd only half listened through. Before she could say more, a car horn beeped twice in the distance. Heads turned toward the street bordering the park entrance. A beat-up silver minivan, unmistakably theirs, rolled into view, sputtering as it lurched to a stop at the curb. The driver's door swung open, and Drew stepped out, looking both flustered and furious, like he couldn't decide who to blame for being late. Then Emily stepped out behind him, lifting their toddler with one arm and slamming the passenger door with the other. Drew spotted me almost instantly. His jaw clenched, and his pace slowed. For a moment, I thought he might turn around and leave. But no, he squared his shoulders and started walking toward the gathering with that same smug confidence he'd carried since we were kids. The confidence of someone who always had backup. Someone who thought he'd never lose. And to be fair, he hadn't. Not really. Until now. As he approached, I noticed something subtle but telling. Emily wasn't walking beside him. She lagged behind, hanging back with the kid. And she was staring at me the entire time. Not at my clothes. Not at the car. At me. Drew extended a hand. Didn't think you'd show. I looked at it, then back at him. Neither did you, apparently. He forced a laugh. Car trouble. You know how it is. Not really. I replied, letting the smile curl slowly. Mine runs fine. The silence between us stretched just long enough to be uncomfortable. Then he dropped his hand and gave a stiff nod. Look, I know there's history, but maybe today we let that go, yeah? Just family stuff. No drama. That word. Family. It hit different when it came from him. Before I could respond, my mom stepped between us like a diplomat rushing to prevent war. Let's not turn this into a scene. We're here to celebrate. All of us. And Ryan, honey, you being here means so much. Really. I studied her. The same woman who, years ago, told me Emily was never meant for you anyway, with a straight face. Who'd smiled through the cracks in my life like they were decorative. But I wasn't here for apologies. Not yet. The event went on in awkward waves. I floated through the afternoon like a ghost in a place I no longer belonged to. People greeted me with a mix of confusion and politeness. Cousins I hadn't seen in years gave me half-hearted hugs, clearly unsure how to approach the missing Bennett brother. But I smiled, small and polite, never offering more than was necessary. And then came the speech. My mom tapped a fork to her wine glass and stood up near the front of the picnic area, her tone syrupy with performative cheer. I just want to thank everyone for coming today. It means the world to see our whole family, finally, back together. And especially, she paused for effect, my sons. Drew, of course, who's had such a challenging year but continues to inspire us with his strength, and Ryan, who surprised us all by showing up after, well, a little time away. I felt every eye swing toward me like searchlights. She kept going. Families go through things. Hard things. But we're strong. We forgive. And we move forward. That's what today is all about. Forgive? That word almost made me laugh. But I didn't interrupt. I just watched. Drew was next. He didn't even wait for a cue. He just stood, raised his glass, and launched into one of his rehearsed little monologues, the kind that always earned applause from our relatives. I just want to say how thankful I am, he said, making deliberate eye contact with each table, like some local politician. We've been through a lot, but what matters is that we're here, together. And whatever happened in the past, he glanced at me then, we're still brothers. That never changes. Applause followed. Too much of it. Too loud. Like they were trying to clap away the tension. I stayed seated. I didn't raise my glass. And then, as the clapping died, Emily stood up. No cue. No toast. No announcement. Just silence. She shifted her toddler to her hip and walked to the front, her eyes wide but calm. I wasn't going to say anything, she began, her voice clear and steady. But since we're all being honest today, Drew's head snapped toward her. Emily. She held up a hand. No, you've had your turn. My mother's face paled. I've kept quiet for years, Emily said. Out of guilt. Out of fear. Out of shame, honestly. But seeing Ryan here, I can't pretend anymore. The entire park went still. No birds. No rustling leaves. Just stillness. She turned to the crowd, her voice growing stronger. What Drew did, what they did, was wrong. You all know what happened. Or what you thought happened. You all believed Ryan cheated. Lied. Abandoned me. But none of that was true. Her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted the baby. Drew lied. He showed me fake texts. Fake screenshots. Convinced me that Ryan had another woman. Said he was just trying to protect me. My pulse thundered in my ears. Emily looked at me. And I believed him. Because I was young. because I thought I owed him something after everything fell apart, and because I trusted the people around me to tell me the truth. Drew stood up fast, panic in his eyes. Emily, sit down. You're upset. I'm not finished. She turned to him. You stole my life. You manipulated everyone. Me, your family, your friends, just to take what your brother had. And you let them believe he was the problem. You let them bury him while you played the victim. Gasps rippled through the tables. A few relatives were visibly uncomfortable. My aunt shifted in her seat. Someone coughed. Emily looked back at me again. I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. But I needed you to know that I see it now. I see you. I should have seen it before. My hands clenched around my glass, but I didn't say a word. My mother stood up, trying to salvage control. All right, that's enough. This isn't the time. Emily rounded on her. You encouraged him. You smiled through it. You told me, after Ryan left, that it was for the best, that he wasn't stable, that Drew would take care of me. Her voice cracked slightly. You sold me on a lie. The baby began to fuss. Emily held him tighter. Drew's face was burning red. You don't know what you're talking about. You were miserable with him. I saved you from making a mistake. You were the mistake, Emily snapped. Then she turned to me, and the weight in her gaze nearly knocked the breath from my chest. I never stopped wondering why you disappeared. Now I know it was the only thing you could do. She stepped down from the stage, her heels clicking softly against the wood. And then she walked straight past Drew, past my mother, who looked like she might collapse, and disappeared into the crowd. No applause followed. No one moved. Drew stood frozen. My mother sat, lips pursed into a pale, trembling line. And me? I stood, calmly, slowly, and without a word, I walked toward the microphone. The microphone was still warm from Emily's hand when I stepped up to it. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just looked out over the crowd, the same crowd that had once laughed at Drew's jokes about me, nodded along when my mom said I was overly sensitive, the same group that sent me off with silence when I vanished. Now they stared at me, mouths slightly open, unsure whether to brace for an explosion or an apology. I gave them neither. I simply said, I'm not here to clear my name. That would assume I still cared what any of you thought. There was a faint rustle of discomfort. My mom shifted in her seat. Drew took a single step forward and froze when I glanced his way. I just wanted to see, I continued, to see if anything had changed. I scanned the tables. Faces that once filled the background of my childhood. The same people who never once reached out. Not after the breakup. Not after the lies. Not when I vanished. Not until they found out I was worth something. But it hasn't, I said quietly. You still cheer for the loudest voice in the room. Still defend whoever makes you feel most comfortable. And you still mistake performance for character. My voice was steady, but my hands shook slightly. Not with anger, not anymore. With release. I used to think I just wasn't good enough for this family, I added. Turns out I was just too honest. Then I stepped back, placed the microphone gently on the table, and walked away. I didn't wait for a reaction. I didn't care what came next. I just wanted to be gone. I reached my car and paused for a moment before getting in. The polished black hood reflected the sky above, cloudless, endless. I didn't even remember driving there that morning. I didn't remember much at all. Just the weight. The heaviness I'd carried for years. The unanswered questions. The nights I stared at ceilings wondering how people I loved could be so casual about destroying me. The sick feeling in my stomach every time I replayed Emily's face the night she left. The ache of losing her. The ache of losing myself. It all caught up to me then. I sat in the driver's seat, closed the door, and finally exhaled, like I'd been holding my breath since the day I disappeared. The next few days were a blur. I returned to the hotel in a kind of trance. I didn't eat much, didn't sleep well. I kept replaying the reunion over and over. Emily's speech, my mother's face, Drew's tightening fists. The silence from everyone else. That was the part that lingered the most. The silence. No one stood up. No one defended me. Even after the truth came out. They just sat there. And I realized, maybe I'd never lost a family. Maybe I'd never had one. That thought broke something loose inside me. Not in a violent way. Not in a way that made me want to scream or throw something. But in a way that made everything finally make sense. The next morning, I drove around the old neighborhood. Past my childhood home. The park where Drew broke my nose in a friendly football game, and Mom told me I was being dramatic. The ice cream shop where I once took Emily after our first real fight. The one where she admitted she hated how my family talked down to me. They were ghosts now. Every memory a shadow on pavement. I stopped by the cemetery. My grandfather, the only person in my family who ever made me feel truly seen, was buried there. I hadn't visited in years. I knelt by his grave and spoke out loud, even though no one was around. I think I finally understand what you meant, I whispered. You said sometimes the only way to survive a storm is to walk away from the house that refuses to fix its roof. He used to speak in metaphors. At the time, I thought he was just being poetic. Now I saw it for what it was, a warning. I didn't cry. I just felt empty. The next day, I returned home. My real home. The one I built. Not from nostalgia, not from hand-me-downs, but from grit, from pain, from rebuilding a self they tried to erase. And then I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do in a long, long time. I started planning. Not for revenge. Not yet. But for clarity. I pulled out every record I had. Old messages, timelines, financial records. I started mapping out what had happened in those last few months before I vanished. I didn't know what I was looking for at first. Maybe I just needed to see it all laid out. The betrayal, the manipulation, the way they turned my life upside down while smiling through it. But the more I uncovered, the clearer the patterns became. Emily hadn't just been manipulated emotionally. There were financial threads too. Bank transfers, shifts in ownership. My old apartment lease had been co-signed by Drew at some point. Why? I never added him. The ring I'd bought for Emily? A custom order under my name. But the purchase history showed it had been picked up by someone else. 2 days before she left me. Things weren't just personal. They were calculated. I brought in a friend of mine, a forensic accountant I'd met through one of our angel investors. I asked him to look at a few documents. Casually, no context. Just a situation I'm working through. A week later, he called me back. Ryan, he said carefully, you might want to sit down. I already was. He walked me through it. How Drew had used my identity to secure a small loan. How he'd forged a signature on the ring transaction. How someone, likely with access to my personal documents, had attempted to open a joint account in my name and Emily's, days before the breakup. I thanked him, hung up, and stared at the wall for an hour. It was deeper than I thought. It wasn't just a relationship stolen. It was a life hijacked. They didn't just try to ruin me emotionally. They tried to erase me. But they failed. And now? Now I had everything I needed. Not just to heal, but to build the quietest, coldest fire they'd ever feel. Healing isn't linear. That's something I learned slowly. Not in the poetic Instagram quote kind of way, but in the gut-wrenching, sleepless night kind of way. There were days I felt weightless, like the truth had finally set me free. And then there were mornings I woke up clenching my jaw, reliving the betrayal in fragments. Drew's smirk, Emily's disbelief, my mother's chilling indifference. But after the shock wore off, something else took root in its place. Focus. I threw myself into my company like it was oxygen. Every hour became a brick. Every deal, every hire, every product release. A wall between who I used to be and who I was becoming. The world may not have known what my family did to me, but it would damn sure know who I was without them. The startup, which I'll just call Lucent Tech here, had been doing well before. But now it thrived. Maybe it was the clarity. Maybe it was that small ember of rage I let burn just hot enough to keep me sharp. But our growth exploded over the next 18 months. We pivoted our product into something bigger, a platform that automated back-end optimization for small to mid-sized SaaS companies. Doesn't sound sexy, but it was exactly what a dozen struggling startups needed, and we landed 3 major contracts within 6 months. From there, it snowballed. We expanded, hired 20 new people, moved into a sleek downtown office with an open floor plan and high ceilings that made everyone feel a little more powerful than they probably were. But I wasn't just building a company. I was building my own empire. I took courses, met mentors, hired a PR firm, sat on panels, spoke at conferences under my own name. The same name they once dragged through the dirt now appeared in Forbes' 20 entrepreneurs to watch under 30 list. Funny how that works. And with each new milestone, the calls started again. It started small. A text from my dad. Proud of you, son. Saw the article. I didn't reply. Then an email from my mother. We're planning another family event. Maybe this time you could make a toast. Nope. But the one that made me stop, really stop, came from Emily. It was short. No subject line. Just one sentence. Would you ever want to meet him? I knew who him was. Her son, Drew's son, the child I'd once imagined might have been mine, in another life, before all of this. I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I looked at the message and asked myself a question I hadn't considered in years. What do I want? Not what do I need? Not what would make them hurt? Not what justice looks like? But me. What do I want after all of this? And the answer was simple. Peace. But peace, for me, would never come from forgiveness. Not until the scales were balanced. And I was finally in a position to do that. See, one of the benefits of building a tech company from scratch is that you become very good at research, at tracking, at noticing details most people overlook, like how my brother's house was technically under my mother's name now, a transfer likely done to avoid creditors, or how he'd tried to launch his own app with a shoddy dev team from overseas, only for it to flop within 3 months, or how Emily had filed for legal separation, a quiet document buried in county records, barely noticed by anyone, but enough to tell me their house wasn't a happy one. And most interesting of all, Drew had applied for a job at a company we'd recently acquired. He didn't know I owned it. Of course he didn't. It was one of 6 under an umbrella firm I created for tax purposes. No one saw my name on the paperwork, not unless I wanted them to. His resume landed on my desk by pure coincidence, or fate, depending on how you look at things. And when I saw his cover letter, I laughed for the first time in weeks. Experienced in project leadership and brand management, with a strong track record in cross-functional collaboration and public speaking. He was applying to be a product lead at my company, in my empire. I sat with that for a while, and then I made a decision. Not just about him, about all of them. It was time, not for an explosion, not for a public takedown, but for something far colder, more surgical, something that didn't look like revenge, but would feel like it every day. I called my lawyer. We discussed this plan months ago, back when I first showed him the forged documents. He'd called it nuclear-level leverage. I told him to start the paperwork. Then I sent an email, just 3 lines, to Drew, from a private address he wouldn't recognize. We've reviewed your application. We'd like to invite you to a final interview. Bring your A game. Then I sat back and waited. Power isn't loud. It's patient. And mine was just beginning to speak. The email had been sent on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, Drew responded, faster than I expected and more eagerly than I'd imagined. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I've done extensive research on your company, and I'm confident I can bring fresh value to your product team. I'm available to meet next week, any day, anytime. There it was again, that old Drew confidence. That greasy, unshakable arrogance dressed up as charm. I could almost hear his voice reading the words, see the smirk curling at the edge of his lips as he imagined acing the interview and climbing back to relevance through someone else's success. Just like he always had. I passed the email to my assistant and told her to schedule the interview for Wednesday at our newest branch, a converted loft space downtown that doubled as our innovation lab and development satellite. It was sleek, intimidating, and entirely disconnected from any press we'd done. No signage, no names, just a minimalist building with frosted glass and a quiet security system that would log every movement from the moment he walked in. I had it staged perfectly. Meanwhile, my lawyer called with an update. Everything's in place, he said, his tone cool and precise. We can initiate a formal inquiry if you're ready. The forgery charges will stick. You've got the purchase receipts, witness statements, and digital logs. Same with the fraudulent loan. He'll panic the second he gets that first letter. I didn't say anything right away. I just stood at the window of my office, looking out over the city skyline, the low hum of traffic rising like static. Not yet, I said finally. I want to give him a chance to see it with his own eyes first. I want him to realize who he tried to steal from. Understood, the lawyer replied. But you know the moment we trigger this, it's going to get messy. I smiled faintly. That's fine. I've spent the last 5 years cleaning up their mess. One more round won't break me. Once that call ended, I turned to the next phase, learning just how deep Drew's spiral went. I hired a private investigator. Not for dirt, necessarily. I didn't need scandal. I needed specifics. And the report that came back within a week was illuminating. Drew and Emily had been living in a house they couldn't afford, one that had been kept afloat with a series of gifts from my mother, pulled from the last vestiges of a retirement fund my father had quietly built. Emily, after filing for separation, had moved into a small apartment across town. She'd left most of her belongings behind. Their son, Caleb, stayed with her, and based on the PI's observation logs, Drew hadn't made much effort to visit. Worse, Drew had been applying to dozens of companies. Every rejection seemed to hit harder than the last. He'd cashed out a small 401k to pay off a credit card. He was selling things online, a TV, a mountain bike, even his old college letterman jacket. He was desperate, and desperate men made mistakes. I called in a favor from someone in our recruitment team. I didn't need Drew to pass any initial screenings, but I did want the interview panel to treat him like a serious candidate. I wanted the illusion to last. Be neutral, I told them. Ask him tough questions. Make him sweat a little. But don't let on who's behind this. Not yet. When Wednesday arrived, I dressed with care, not in a flashy way, but with unmistakable polish. Dark blazer, open collar, watch worth more than Drew's monthly rent, tucked neatly under the cuff. I arrived early and waited in the observation room behind a two-way glass wall, sipping black coffee as I watched him walk in. He looked different, older, not in a mature way, in a hollowed-out way. His eyes had lost their gleam. His posture, once annoyingly proud, sagged slightly at the edges. He wore a cheap blazer that didn't quite fit, and his handshake with the recruiter was a little too firm, like he was trying to assert control he didn't really have. Still, he talked, and talked, and talked. He spun stories, boasted about brand leadership experience and project execution, half of which I knew were lies. He threw in buzzwords like synergy and scalability and claimed credit for projects I knew he hadn't touched. At one point, he even mentioned my old app, the prototype Emily and I had designed in college, and claimed he consulted during early development. That made me laugh out loud behind the glass. When the interview was over, I told the team to stall him for 15 minutes. Just long enough for me to slip into the corner office upstairs, the one with my name etched subtly on the glass. I didn't usually work from this location, but today was a special occasion. 15 minutes later, there was a knock. Come in, I called. Drew entered, a little flushed from the heat, carrying a fake leather folder with copies of his resume inside. And then he saw me. He stopped, dead in his tracks. He didn't say a word, just stared. I waited 3 beats, then leaned back in my chair and gave him a small, slow smile. Hey, Drew, I said. Long time. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. I didn't realize. No, I cut in. I'm sure you didn't. A heavy pause settled in the air like fog. I let it stretch, let him sit in the realization. I didn't come here to gloat. I lied calmly. This isn't about revenge. This is about closure. His lips parted. Ryan, listen, man, I know things got messy back then, but I was trying to protect Emily. I thought you were. Save it. I stood up, slow and deliberate. You weren't protecting anyone. You lied. You forged documents. You poisoned my relationship, stole my ring, my lease, my name. And then you wore my life like a coat that didn't fit. He paled. That's not. You know what the difference between us is? I stepped closer. You've spent your whole life needing applause. I just needed time. And you gave it to me. 5 years of silence. 5 years to build something you'll never touch. He looked like he wanted to run, but he didn't move. I reached into the desk drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside was a copy of the forged lease, a transaction record from the jewelry store, a printed email where he'd pretended to be me. I slid it across the table. I have the originals, and the legal team, and the funds to drag this through every court in the state. He stared at it without touching it. But I'm not going to do that, I added. His head snapped up. Because that would make you the center of the story again. And frankly, you're not worth the ink. Another beat of silence. Then I turned away and said, you can see yourself out. And I let him walk. No guards. No threats. No security escort. Just silence. Because what came next wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be devastating. He left without saying a word. Not a stammered excuse. Not a fake apology. Nothing. Just a pale, shell-shocked expression as he backed out of the office and closed the door with a soft click, like he was afraid to wake a sleeping beast. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. The look on his face told me everything I'd hoped for. Realization, regret, and a dawning fear that maybe, just maybe, the brother he thought he buried hadn't just survived, but had come back wearing armor. Still, that wasn't the revenge. That was just the opening act. The real show began the next morning. At precisely 9 a.m., Drew received a letter from my legal team. Not a full lawsuit, not yet, but a formal notice of investigation into forgery and identity theft, citing specific dates, transaction logs, and witness statements. It was worded professionally, but between the lines, the message was clear. We see what you did. We can prove it, and we're ready to bury you with it. I knew Drew well enough to predict his next move, denial, followed by panic, then desperate calls to our mother, to anyone he thought might shield him. And sure enough, by noon, my mom was blowing up my inbox with subject lines like, "Please call me. This has gone too far," and my personal favorite, "You're still family." I didn't reply, because the next phase of the plan was already in motion, the part where I didn't just level the playing field. I took it. Remember the house Drew was living in? The one technically under my mother's name? Yeah, that was intentional. Because 2 years ago, when I caught wind that she was funneling money to him, retirement funds, credit lines, even refinancing the lake house my grandfather left her, I stepped in behind the scenes, quietly, legally, and with a polite offer she never understood the full scope of. A family friend, acting as a wealth advisor, approached her with an opportunity to consolidate her debts and free up some cash flow. She bit. The terms were generous. She signed. And just like that, half the deed to the home became part of a trust. My trust. She never realized I was behind it. Never asked who the silent partner was. Why would she? She thought I was still off somewhere licking my wounds, not orchestrating her undoing. And now, with Drew teetering and the threat of legal fallout looming over his head, I decided to make my move. A second letter was sent, this time from the trust's legal counsel, informing the co-owners, my mother and me, that due to a defaulted clause in the agreement, a motion would be filed to liquidate the property unless the outstanding debt was resolved. There was no way they could pay it off. I'd made sure of that. But even that wasn't the finishing blow. That came through Emily. I hadn't contacted her since the reunion. I wasn't sure I ever would. But when the time came, I sent her a single message. "If you'd like full custody, I can help." She responded within an hour. We met at a quiet cafe halfway between our cities. She looked different, tired, but clearer, like someone who'd finally surfaced after nearly drowning. "I don't want money," she said first. "If that's what this is." "It's not," I replied. "I want nothing from you." She nodded slowly. "Then why?" I sipped my coffee. "Because you're the only one who said the truth out loud. And because that kid deserves better than a father who treats people like toys." Her eyes glistened for a second, but she didn't cry. "Tell me what I need to do," she said. And I did. I gave her everything. Legal connections, financial backing, character references from people in Drew's own failed business ventures who were more than happy to talk about his impulsive behavior, verbal abuse, and negligence. My lawyer drafted a quiet agreement offering Emily enough support to stabilize her and Caleb long-term. No ties, no strings, no loopholes. Just a clean break. 2 months later, the custody hearing came and went. Drew showed up alone, unprepared, unrepresented. Emily left with full custody and a reinforced legal barrier that prevented Drew from accessing Caleb without court approval. Then came the final stroke. The local newspaper, small but respected, ran a profile on Lucent Tech and its founder. A glowing feature, full-page photo, quotes about resilience and redemption. And right there in the sidebar, a little mention of an old betrayal, legal action, and how personal loss fueled a now multi-million-dollar venture. The name Drew Bennett wasn't in the article, but everyone knew, especially in our town. I didn't write the article, but I approved every line. The fallout was slow and thorough. Friends stopped returning Drew's calls. The small businesses that once trusted him with side work distanced themselves. My mother, realizing the house was no longer salvageable, quietly put it up for sale. The asking price was low, the interest even lower. Her reputation, once polished and proud, now came with a bitter aftertaste. And me? I stayed quiet. Because revenge, real revenge, isn't loud. It's not a dramatic speech or a final showdown. It's watching someone realize, in the stillness of their own ruin, that the person they discarded is the one holding every string. It's letting them hear the echo of your silence in every locked door, every severed tie, every opportunity that slips through their fingers. It's being the ghost they thought was gone, until the day they realize you've been watching the whole time. And I wasn't finished yet. The house sold for half of what it was worth. My mother moved into a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town, far from the neighborhood where she'd once hosted garden parties and proudly told anyone who'd listened that her boys were doing so well. The shame didn't hit her all at once. It chipped away slowly, in grocery aisles where old friends didn't wave, in whispered conversations behind her back, in the pitying glances from the church group that stopped inviting her to luncheons. She tried calling me. Once. I didn't pick up. She left a voicemail, her voice thin and brittle. "Ryan, please. We're still family." But she'd already taught me what family meant to her. And I remembered. I remembered when she sat across from me, stone-faced, telling me Emily was never meant for me. I remembered how she let Drew lie, watched him poison my life, and still smiled through it. I remembered how, when I was gone, she didn't wonder if I was okay, only how to spin the story. And now, she had no story left to tell. Drew, on the other hand, did what Drew always did. He ran. After losing custody, after the article, after the house was sold, he tried to disappear into another city, another job, another identity. But the digital world didn't forget. Employers Googled him. Background checks lit up red flags. His resume was flagged for inconsistencies. He started freelancing, underpaying himself just to get a foot in the door, but even those doors closed fast. One night, James, my old college roommate, sent me a screenshot. Drew had started a GoFundMe. The caption read, "Trying to rebuild for my son." Life threw me some unfair curveballs. No mention of Emily, or me, or the truth. I didn't donate. Neither did anyone else. It stayed at $75. 3 weeks in. Emily, meanwhile, thrived. She found a job working with a local nonprofit that supported single mothers and young families. I got a card from her one day, just a plain envelope with a crayon drawing inside from Caleb. No message, no signature, just a little stick figure with spiky hair and a lopsided smile, holding hands with a taller one in a suit. I kept it pinned to my fridge, not because I needed to remember who I was to them, but to remind myself of who I had become despite them. I didn't speak about the past often. Not to the press, not to my partners, not to the people who worked beside me every day. Because revenge wasn't my origin story. It was just the footnote. The real story was the rebuilding, the becoming. The fact that I walked away with nothing but a suitcase and returned with a name that carried weight. My mother used to say, "You'll regret walking away from your family." But here's what she never understood. I didn't walk away from family. I walked away from people who called themselves family, but only ever treated me like a backup plan. And I never looked back. Not until the reunion. Not until I pulled up in a $200,000 car, stepped out in a suit worth more than Drew's last paycheck, and watched from the hilltop as they arrived late, huddled and sweating, because their rusted minivan had broken down 2 blocks away. They limped into the gathering while I stood under the shade, glass in hand, watching them scan the crowd, watching them look for me, and realizing I wasn't standing in their shadow anymore. They were standing in mine.